to talk about a subject that is near and dear to my heart, which is contracting for both hotels and convention centers. And a lot of the policies that we'll be discussing here in points apply for both hotel and convention centers. We'll get the legalese out of the way to start with. This is not intended to provide legal advice, but rather I hope to provide you with some advice, tips, information that you can take back to your offices and use. We'll start out with some definitions and terms taken from the Convention Industry Council Apex Industry Glossary. And actually, I'll throw up the definition. If you can name the word, I've got some salsa and chip prizes here for you. So, yeah. Don't say that. Private dispute resolution process, often referred to as alternate dispute resolution, in which the parties agree to submit their dispute to an impartial third party for decision. Arbitration, very good, very good. Here we go. You win. You're a winner. Welcome. How about difference between actual number of sleeping rooms or food and beverage and the formulas agreed to in your contract? That is an infamous attrition. I call it the dreadful A word, but yeah, attrition. There you go. Guidelines by which a convention center or other venue prioritizes reservations, and it may correspond to hotel rooms the event will use in the area. This is a little more difficult, and it's not necessarily used in a contract, but I like to put it up there because it impacts every one of you that works with hotels booking policy. And what this means is that if you are a trade show, you're going to have a longer booking window than if you were a consumer show. I'm with the National Marine Manufacturers Association. I've been with them for 14 years. It's my third association, and prior to that I was in hotel management for 20-some years, so I'm as old as older than that table for sure. But from a booking policy standpoint, consumer shows, having mentioned that we have 21 of them, I'm well aware of this, that depending upon the city and the convention center, you're going to have a longer or shorter booking window to book your event. Some of them will allow you to book your event as far as 24 months out. I don't recall any that will allow you to book a consumer show further out than that, and some you have to wait until you're 12 months out. But guess what? If you're a trade show, our trade show we can book as far as 10 years out if we wanted to. We could. I also want to mention before we move ahead, I would very much like for this to be as interactive as it can be. So if you have any questions as we go along, raise your hand. I'd much rather not make it through the whole presentation and have you satisfied with what we covered than making it through everything and have you going out wondering, what was that about? So raise your hands. Anyone would like to venture what this is the definition of? And I will give you a little clue. Some of these definitions have the word actually embedded in the definition itself. Cancellation! We have a winner. Well done. How about this? Fourth, there we go. There we go. Another winner. And how about this? Organization that provides reservation services for a group and its attendees. Housing Bureau. We're going to spend a little bit of time on that later on, so I wanted to include that. This is one that we're all familiar with, I think. Contractor retained by a facility to be on site and provide services as needed, sometimes on an exclusive basis, not all times. You want to venture what that would be? Anyone want to venture that? Pardon me? Yeah, well, close, very close. In-house contractor. This is the last prize I have, but please, there's another definition or two. If you know the answer, let us know. Computer program that uses variable pricing models to maximize return on fixed perishable inventory, such as hotel rooms based on supply-demand theory. I have this up here not because you're going to have it in your contracts necessarily, but because it impacts everyone in this room. It's yield management. And this has become so sophisticated that there are hotel companies, most of your major hotel companies today can tell you what their room rate will be a year from now and what they should be charging your group. So let's jump into hotel contracting and some of the more common hotel sections. And I would say that these aren't by any means exclusive. There could be others that you may want, and you won't necessarily get all of these, but I recommend that you ask, and if you don't ask for something, you definitely won't get it. Legal names of both parties, obviously you want to have that in there, the hotel and the name of your organization. And then room block. There's different pieces to this. You want to break it down by the day, date, and room type, but cutoff date. That's important because the closer the cutoff date is to your actual event, the more likely you are to fill your hotel rooms. And pickup reports required every how many days. The best tool you have at your disposal when you work with a hotel or a convention center is the historical information on your group. So you want to do everything you can to obtain and maintain that. And one of the ways is to put in your hotel contract that they're going to provide you with this report. It should be, depending upon the size of your group, the larger your group, the further out it should begin. Maybe it should begin as 9 months out if you have a huge group. Certainly no later than 4 months out. And then the closer you get to your event, the more frequent the report should be. And then reservation is held until what time? And then an early departure statement. And what do I mean by that? Most hotel organizations now will have a statement. It's kind of like the airlines. They're all looking for ways to make more money, right? Like a bag fee or whatever. Well, now they want to charge your attendees and exhibitors a fee if they depart early. So it would behoove you if you can have a statement in your contract that would allow your exhibitor or attendee to change their departure date when they check in, if it's not what was originally provided. And without penalty, where it can be changed without penalty. We try to get that in our hotel contracts so our exhibitors and attendees don't have to pay any more than they need to. And then room rates. Attendees and exhibitors, your staff and speaker rates, et cetera, would normally be lesser than the conference rate. And multi-year agreements, rate not to exceed a certain percentage over the current rate. What do I mean by that? If you know you're going to work with a hotel for more than 1 year, even if it's not successive years, it may be to your advantage to do a multi-year agreement. That gives you leverage. However, if you do that, you don't want to just list the rate for your current year and leave it open-ended for any year or years after that. So I highly recommend, the ideal situation would be you're in there this year and your rate is 150 and you agree on a rate of 152 for the next year. But if the hotel can't do that, and some say that they can't because there are so many external factors that they have to take into account, get them to agree that it won't be increased by a certain percentage, just so it's not open-ended. So you don't end up with, $150 rate year one, and year two, your attendees go there and they say, my God, the rate is 175 this year. It was only 150 last year. What happened? Concessions. This is a major portion of your agreement. It's something near and dear to all organizations, and this is predicated upon, once again, the amount of business that you bring in the hotel. The more business you provide them, normally the greater your concessions will be. Your complimentary room ratio is at 1 per 35, 1 per 50, over and above comps, and that has nothing to do with your complimentary room ratio. This is just rooms that are given to you based upon the size of your room block that are comp. Staff rates, and I mentioned earlier, normally that's a percentage off of whatever your conference rate ends up being. Food and beverage discounts. You can negotiate that. Until you're done with your contract, your hotel contract, everything's negotiable. Until you have, I'm from the old school, so I say until you have a verbal agreement. You obviously want to get it signed, but once you have a verbal agreement, you should have an agreement. But until then, everything's negotiable, and if you can get a food and beverage discount, why not? And then there's other areas that may be particular to your group, that's important to your group, that you want to negotiate with the hotel up front. Maybe it's a downtown hotel and it's important to your group that you have free parking or minimally discounted parking. Or maybe it's real important for your group to have free Wi-Fi in the meeting rooms. Whatever it is, you want to plug it in there. Oh, and I can't forget the infamous resort fee that's out there now. Billing and accounting, another section of the agreement. Who pays for what? You want to spell that out. I mean, obviously, group-related events, you're going to be taken care of, or your organization. But you don't want to be held accountable for charges that are not group-related. You want to spell that out. And who's authorized to make changes or assign for charges? And this may seem small, this next point, how the bill is organized. But you could have a huge event, and sometimes it can take anywhere from 21 to 60 days to get your bill back. And by the time you get that, you could have forgotten half of what has taken place. So if you ask the hotel to organize it in a certain manner, maybe you want all your room charges on one folio, all your food charges on another. However, they'll work with you if you ask for it in advance, and it can really facilitate the billing of that. Attrition language. Later on, we're going to go over what's needed if you have attrition and what's needed if you don't. Note in bold it says that even if you don't have attrition, you want language in your agreement. Why might that be? If you don't, exactly. If you do not spell it out that you don't have attrition, the hotel can come back and say, well, you agreed to occupy your room block. And if it's black and white, they can't come back to you like that. And depending upon the relationship you have with the hotel, that may or may not be an issue, but why let it be an issue? Overbooking to the hotel. Who's walked? Like I say, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I've had it happen to me where I've had someone from our board of directors walk up on the first day of the event and say, thanks a lot, guy. What are you talking about? I was walked last night. I'm not staying at the Hilton like I thought I was going to be, like you said I was going to be. They took, I had to go down and stay at the Comfort Inn, Well, you want to make it real clear to your hotel partner what's going to happen if they're in a walk situation. And first and foremost, you want to know. You want to know as soon as they know. If that's 6 months out, you want to know then. If it's the day before, you want to know then. Whenever it is, you want to know, and you want to have a plan that you work with the hotel on. You want to be sure that your president isn't walked, any of your board members, anyone that's important to you, you want to be sure that they're taken care of. And then what happens when they are walked? Do they receive complimentary accommodations where they're walked to? Do they get complimentary accommodations when they come back, if they come back? What about the room being guaranteed the next night to bring them back? And transportation or phone calls, anything you want to take into account in a walk situation, it should be spelled out in the agreement. Function space. Now, you probably are working with a hotel not just for the room block, but because you want to use some of their function space that you very diligently did a site visit on and walked through their space and determined that that meeting space would work for your group, and you know your group better than anybody else. So you want to list the meeting room names in your agreement with a stipulation that those rooms can't be changed without your okay. Because you don't want the hotel to have the authority to move your group into a room that's not going to work for you. It's happened, you know. You go down, all of a sudden you're in a room with a pillar in the middle of it, and it just doesn't work. Well, it's too late then. Move in and move out time, and if you have a huge event that requires setup time or tear down, you want to be sure to allow for that when you ask for the meeting space. Because hotels have a very perishable inventory, sleeping rooms or meeting rooms, and like the airlines, they try to maximize that. And if you don't ask for a room for 3 days that you may need it for setup and tear down, guess what? You may not have it for that setup period. If you realize, oh, I need it the day before, they may have already rented it. How is the space to be set? You want to let them know that, because you typically will get one setup complimentary, and then if they have to reset the room, you're going to be charged for it. Food and beverage pricing, your event may take place next year. It may take place, 5 years from when you sign the hotel agreement. If you know what the food and beverage pricing is then. Kind of like the room rate. If you can get them to agree that they won't increase their pricing by X% by the time your group is there, it behooves you to do that. Once again, just so you're not surprised when you get there. And also, food and beverage can be customized by hotels. Going back to using the L word, leverage, any event that you have that the hotel realizes can be held either with them or at the convention center or at another hotel, they realize that they're in competition to get that event. So ask them to customize menus for you that will work for you within your budget. You'll be surprised how creative they can be under those circumstances. ADA, another common section within hotel contracts, mainly to protect both the facility and the organizer. Force majeure. This is something that needs to be reciprocal, and it needs to provide protection also in the case of partial cancellation. Yeah, it's happened. You're 1 day into a 3-day event, and then there's a threat of a major hurricane, day 2, or whatever the threat is, and you have to cancel your event. Well, what happens then? Are you on the hook to the hotel for those sleeping rooms? You want to be sure to spell that out. And that is not limited. It's good for any unforeseen circumstance. You can try. You can lock yourself in a room for a day and try to think of every circumstance imaginable that could surface that you would need to cancel your event for. You're bound to forget something. So you want to cover yourself and say it's good for any unforeseen circumstance. Then cancellation, this is something that you need to be as clear on as you can. What conditions will justify cancellation from your standpoint? Construction, certainly that's a consideration. Needed facility, it's not uncommon. We had a gentleman in the first session that said that he has in his agreement that if the convention center is not available, they can cancel their hotel contract. So force majeure, obviously any force majeure event would be a reason for cancellation. And rest assured, the hotel is going to spell it out very clearly what your cancellation penalties are. Basically, there are two types. There's liquidated and there's actual damages. But what happens if the hotel cancels? Well, they should be on the hook also for something. You want to spell that out, because that can and it has happened. And in resold language, I am a proponent that if you have cancellation or attrition, that the objective is to make the hotel whole. And you do that by reimbursing them for lost profits. Well, if you have a resold clause in there, that any rooms that they're able to sell that you cancel or you don't achieve from an attrition standpoint, that prevents the hotel from double booking. And they should be fine with that. From double dipping, from double dipping. They should be fine with that, because in the end, they should want to recoup what they lost. They shouldn't want that and an additional charge, right? Insurance, and that should work both ways. They're going to insist that we as organizers have it. Well, they as a facility They have it, so why shouldn't that be part of the agreement also? Then arbitration or attorney, and there's different schools of thoughts on this, and this is really kind of an organizational policy on what their preference is. You may or may never have a dispute, but if you do, how is it going to be handled? Are you going to handle it through an attorney or through arbitration? I'm an arbitration guy because I think it's a little more expedient and a little less costly. But whatever your preference is, my recommendation would be that you precede that with a mediation clause, which can also save you time and money. Any questions so far? When you're working with hotels and convention centers, it's about relationships. You want to establish a win-win. I mean, hotels and convention centers, they're in a business, to drive a profit. You want to think long-term because the person that you're working with or the individuals that you're working with today, you could be working with 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you don't know. I mentioned that I've been in this line of work for 21 years, and before that I was in hotel work for 20 years. Well, I know people, they're not with the same organization, but they're still in the hotel business with different organizations or in this business that I'm working with. And you're only as good as your reputation. The hotel community is vast. There's thousands of hotels, right? From Los Angeles to New York, from Miami to Seattle. But you'd be amazed at how quickly word will travel. I worked in Hawaii and lived in Hawaii on 3 separate occasions. I call it the coconut wireless. You do something wrong, they're going to hear about it. And a couple of recommendations is when I say that you're only as good as your reputation. Once again, I kind of from the old school. Until a contract is signed, everything is open. But there comes a point where I think you have a verbal agreement, and that's when things really shouldn't be changed, in my opinion. But definitely after you have a signed agreement with the convention center or the hotel, don't renege on anything that you've signed. You've got a commitment. If you do renege, trust me, that coconut wireless is going to work from Seattle to Miami in a heartbeat. From a hotel standpoint, their top areas of revenue are sleeping rooms, food and beverage. They have other revenue centers. They try to make $1 on all these items, obviously. And meeting space is allocated typically based upon the amount of sleeping rooms that you reserve. And that also will drive, for the most part, whether you are or are not charged meeting room rental. And I also would highly recommend that when you work with a hotel and you've got an agreement with them, you've got a room block, and even if you don't have an attrition, and you're in a situation you're not going to use all your rooms well in advance, give them some of those rooms back. Say, look, I know I'm not going to, I just want to be a good partner with you. Here you go. History, your group history is your strongest negotiating tool. Rooms picked up in your room block and rooms picked up outside of your room block. NMMA has 21 consumer shows that we do and 1 trade show. The one trade show that we do was in Miami for 8 years. We left Miami and moved it to Louisville. Well, we wanted Louisville to like us. We wanted them to love us, right? So we got with the Bureau and worked out an arrangement with them that if we were able to prove to them what our economic impact was to the city, the room pickup, both within and outside of our room block, that they would work with us in different ways, and they become very good partners of ours in that regard. So we worked with our registration contractor, and they developed a program for us that before our exhibitors and attendees picked up their badge holders, that there were a few quick scans that were made on sheets that listed all the hotels in the area and hotels outside of the area and a category for other. So when we were through with our event, we were able to have a report that printed out that said from each hotel who stayed there, how many nights they stayed there, what our total pickup was. It was amazing, and we were surprised ourselves as to how many people booked outside of the block. But guess what? It wasn't that critical to us because we had an understanding with the Bureau that all of our pickup counted for the event. Be sure to include all your requirements in your request for proposal before you send it out. And it's best to negotiate everything up front. You know, once the agreement is signed, you don't have any leverage. You really lose that. And you want to include your own hotel contract template as part of your RFP. I highly recommend that you do develop your own hotel contract template because you can work with a dozen different Hyatts, and each Hyatt is going to have their own contract template. But even more to the point, when you start out with a hotel's contract, you're starting out from their position of strength versus yours. Once again, you might not get everything that you want in your contract, but at least you're starting out with something that you're comfortable with. And once you have, I don't want to beat this in the ground here, but once you have the verbal agreement with a hotel, don't be a Columbo and go back to them. Oh, one more thing. Can you add that? Oh, one more thing. Can you add that? Because typically, by the time you have that verbal agreement, they've done their very best in rate and concessions. So, in sending your RFP out to several hotels, it gives you an idea on what the best rates and terms are you're able to achieve. And if you include your hotel contract template as part of that, when you get those back, you may be surprised that Hotel A may have a room rate that they're quoting of $150, but they don't like your hotel contract. So you know you're going to be on the hook for a huge, potential huge liability from attrition, whatever. Hotel B, maybe their room rate is $5 more or $155, but they love your hotel contract. They're going to take it just as is. It may behoove you to work with Hotel B. Yes? Very frequently, a lot, yeah, a lot. And basically, that's kind of, in our eyes, that's kind of our starting point. You know, we don't, one of the first things that we'll ask hotels is, we have our own agreement. We want you to work with it. Will you? And if the answer is, oh, we have this corporate policy, we can't, then we don't work with them. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to take everything as gospel when we give them that agreement. You know, and or they also may say, oh, okay, we'll do that, but we have some things that our corporate office wants us to include. Fine, put it in there, we'll look at it. But at least we know we're starting out with our agreement. Now, we spoke a little bit earlier about hotel profit ranges, and this just guidelines. Rooms are generally 65 to 85%. Catered food 20 to 40. Alcohol 80 to 85, and meeting rooms 90 to 95%. I should mention too that, because I see you're writing feverishly, and some of these things you will want to make note of, but if you want this presentation, just leave me your business card at the end of this. I'll be happy to forward it to you. So let's talk about the infamous or the dreaded A word, attrition. I have one slide if you don't have attrition. And that is to just clarify it, spell it out in the agreement if you don't have attrition. I have a couple of slides if you do have attrition. There's some considerations that can help you and help protect you. One is an audit clause, and this allows you or someone that you designate from your organization to sit with the hotel, preferably the day after your peak night, whatever that happens to be, and compare your registration list with their occupancy list, just to be sure that you get credit for all your rooms. A best rate clause, and this is to provide the least amount of incentive for people to book outside of your block. They don't have the incentive to do that if the rate you have with the hotel is the best rate. Now, there's going to be exceptions to that rule. You know, hotels work with, some of them work with airlines, some of them will work with the IBMs of the world, but they should tell you that up front. So, well, we can do that, but we do have IBM that we give X rate and Delta that we provide this rate to. We can't go under your rate. I mean, those are under your rate, so you need to understand that. That the conference rate is good for X number of days before and after the event. That you get credit for all the reservations booked in and out of your block regardless of source. Oh my goodness. How many different ways can you book a hotel room today? How many ways can you leave your lover, right? And the cutoff date. Once again, the closer the cutoff date is to your event, the more likely you are to fill your room block. And if the cutoff date is not as close as you would like for it to be to your event, you should work with the hotel and ask for, I don't think I have it up there, but for a room block review at certain intervals. Maybe that's 90 days out, maybe it's 60 days out, where you can review your pickup and return a certain percentage of your rooms at no penalty to you based upon your pickup at those review dates. Pickup reports, we touched upon this earlier. They should begin, no less than 4 months out from the event. And the closer you get to the event, the more frequent they should be. During the event, they should be daily, and there's no excuse at all for the hotel not to provide this. None. Room block review dates, we just discussed that. What is your slippage allowance if you have attrition? Is it 10%, 15, 20, whatever it is, that needs to be spelled out? And oh my goodness, this is a hot button of mine. Timing of payment. There are some hotels that have tried to bill us for attrition in advance of our event, before we were there. I'm dumbfounded. How can you do this? I mean, at the cutoff date, they assume that's a pickup. So until we get through the event and we know who booked around our block and what happened within our block, how can you bill us for that? So I'm sorry, but this is not going to be paid. Unacceptable. Now, I don't know if any of you been billed in advance for attrition? That okay? See? Good, I don't feel picked on now. Negotiate up front how attrition will be handled. We just keep going on about attrition, don't we? Two different ways, methods basically. Liquidated, which is a certain amount that you agree to upfront. You're going to pay them, maybe it's, if you lose 10% of your occupancy that you promised them that they would have, it's that those room nights times the room rate. Maybe that's it. Versus actual, and to me that's the preferred method, and that's reimbursing them for the profit that they lost. And that makes the hotel whole. You're paying their lost profits. Now, I promised you an example, and here's an example. This hotel we negotiated a $150 room rate with this hotel. 1,000 room nights in total, and their profit is 70%. We are allowed 200 room nights for slippage, 20%, which is $30,000. So our revenue nut that we need to crack before we're charged attrition is $120,000. Well, we picked up 70% of our room block, or 700 room nights. So we generated $105,000. Under the liquidated damage example, we would be charged $15,000. That would be our liability. Under the actual damages, we would be charged $10,500, saving the organization nearly $5,000. It saves you, and the hotel is whole. Now, I'm not promising you that you'll get that, but once again, if you don't ask, you won't get. Any questions on that? Well, if catering is part of your attrition package, and I would lobby you very heavily to ask them not to include food and beverage as attrition, but if it is, you should lobby even heavier to make the profit level, what your liability is from attrition rather than the check charge. And commit to needed catering space only if you have food and beverage attrition. What do I mean by that? When you prepare your request for proposal, you're listing out all your needs for food and beverage and rooms, right? And the hotels are looking at that and they're seeing a breakfast, 300 breakfasts at $20. Ka-ching! That goes into your revenue that you need to achieve for attrition. They see a dinner, 200 dinners at $50. Ka-ching! If you have a general session room or a room that you can do, for example, a continental breakfast in, and you don't need a separate room that you want to have guaranteed up front, don't make that part of your original agreement. It doesn't need to be. You've got the space already. So bring that up much later in the process, a couple of weeks out from the event, and that should go toward the credit for your food and beverage. You know, the best examples are continental breakfasts and receptions. Most organizations will already have space that they're comfortable with using for that. Third-party housing providers. There are pros and cons to third-party housing providers. I'm a proponent. Actually, with the shows that we have, I work with 3 different housing providers, and each of them I think have their particular strengths for the shows that they work with. But generally, the pros are they can save you time in contracting. But I'm going to throw out a very big caveat right here for contracting. They can do the contracting on your behalf, but be sure to give them direction. What kind of a room rate are you looking for? What are you looking for in a way of concessions? What do you want to achieve in your cutoff? And by all means, be sure that you, even if they sign it, be sure that you sign the contract, that you review and sign it, you or whoever does that for you in your organization. Because if there's any shortfall, if there's any exposure, if there's any liability, the third-party housing provider is not on the hook for it. Who is? Yeah. They can provide an attractive web presence for you, even if they kind of interweave it into yours. Better customer service. Income. How many people in this room can use some additional income for their show? Nobody? Everyone's maximizing their income? Oh, good. Okay. All right. Good. Most third-party housing providers would be perfectly willing to share their commission fee with you in some percentage. Marketing support in the way of, I'm in the habit of asking for a plan up front. What can you do to help in the room pickup? I mean, it's in their best interest because the better the room pickup, the more commission income that they're earning. And it's in our interest, not just from the revenue, but just from a customer service standpoint. And telemarketing, some of them will do that for you too. And we've had third-party housing providers help us in telemarketing, but what we do when we do that is we develop a script for them and have them contact people that have attended past shows and say, hey, by the way, you haven't signed up for the show yet either. Can you please sign up for the show? And we'll book your hotel room while you're on the line. So there's a lot of benefits there. And then reporting. This is the last bullet item, but not the least important, because as I mentioned earlier, history is your greatest and strongest tool when you're working with a hotel partner. Some of these third-party housing providers are so sophisticated in their reporting that they can provide reports that show you not only your pickup, but how you're doing in past years compared for the same period. 3 months out, you did this in 2012. 3 months out, you did this in 11. So you know just exactly how you're progressing. Invaluable tool. There are negatives too. I don't believe this, but some hotels will say, if you use a third-party housing provider, it's going to bump up your rate by 10%. I think long ago, hotels realized that 10% commission was part of doing business. Some have bad reps, and unfortunately, there are a lot of this. You probably have this too. We have this going on right now. We call them poachers and pirates, where they'll contact your exhibitors and your attendees and say, boy, we've got this great deal for you. At a hotel that may be within your room block, we've got this great deal for you that's $50 off of, the show's room block. They don't say it's $50 off the show because they want it to appear that they're with the show, And in Miami, I remember this particular incident where I won't name the hotel, was within our block, and this pirate organization got this exhibitor of ours to prepay for a room for 5 days. He shows up at the hotel, presents his confirmation number. There's no reservation. There's no hotel room. He had prepaid for everything. He comes back to us. I felt terrible, for the guy, but there's absolutely nothing we could do. Nothing. We do the best we can, and I'm sure you do too, to let them know to use the providers that we work with. But unfortunately, people are looking to save money, and if they go outside of your block, there's nothing you can do for them. Questions on hotel, anything that we've covered today yet? No? All right. Oh, good.
Well, I just had a comment. So when we do use a housing bureau, but they're not based on commission.
Yep.
We put it in our contract that the hotel pays them so much for reservation.
Yep. That works. That works. That works too. Yeah. So you derive all the benefits of the bureau. Yep. Good. Well, no presentation would be complete without a top 10 list, and these aren't in any necessary order. But the first, and this is the hotel side. We have convention centers we'll get to in just a couple of minutes. Get it in writing. And this is not up here for the original agreement because obviously you're going to get that in writing. But once you have your original agreement in writing, it's not uncommon to go back to the hotel and say, I need some more rooms on my shoulder nights, especially before my main peak nights, so my event can sell through the room block. Can I have more rooms there? And your salesperson says, sure, you can have them, no problem. Get it in writing. Whatever you agree to after the agreement is signed, get it in writing because your salesperson may not be there when you actually get to the hotel. Use your hotel contract template. Be prepared. Know what you want before you sit down with your hotel partner. I've mentioned ask for what you want. Certainly if you don't ask, you're not going to get. Know what your breaking point is. You know your group better than anyone else. And you may know that your group can't absorb a $150 room rate. Well, if the best the hotel can do is $155, you need to be prepared to walk away from that. Because why sign with them if you know your group is not going to use the block? Well, if you do that, you need to have a plan B. What would that consist of? Well, it could be as simple as reverting to the runner-up hotel in the RFP process. It may mean that you have to go to another hotel entirely. It may mean that you need to change your dates. It may mean that you need to change your venue. But whatever that is, have a plan B. And listen to your hotel partner, because early on, you're going to get a good sense on what their pressure points are. And if you can satisfy a few of those, you'd be surprised how accommodating they will be in return. Don't negotiate against yourself. Simply what I mean by that is that once you've reached that point where you have your verbal agreement and you're just waiting for that to be signed, the hotel has it and they haven't sent it back to you and it's been a day or two, don't call them up all anxious and excited, where is it? Because guess what? They know that, well, hey, we have a little leverage here. I'm not saying they will, but maybe they might say, well, I really shouldn't have done this, so I want to, take that away from you. But obviously, if it goes for a longer period of time, you can call them and say, did you get my email? Where is it? But don't negotiate against yourself. Create a win-win environment and think long-term, where you could be working with that person, as I mentioned earlier, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. You never know. Convention centers. I should ask if there's any other, and if I look like I'm standing funny, I have a cramp in my left foot. That's why. So I'm just trying to. Yeah, right. Right. That's what it is. Any hotel questions before we move on? Okay, let's go to convention centers. And with convention centers also, I do highly recommend that you have a contract template. And I'm going to go over different areas that I recommend that you make part of your template. Now, are you going to get all of these in a convention center agreement? No, you won't. But if you don't ask for them, you're not going to get them. And some of them may seem minute, but you'd be surprised how they may potentially come back to haunt you if you don't have them. And this first one is a prime example because we experienced this in the shows that we had. We had a very profitable show that we wanted to sell to another organization, to assign to another organization, so we could buy another show. If we didn't have in our agreement that the facility couldn't unreasonably withhold consent, we would have been at their mercy. We had it in our agreement that they couldn't unreasonably withhold it, so that wasn't an issue. But why make it an issue? Arbitration or attorney, and we touched upon this in the hotel section. But whatever you end up deciding upon, I highly recommend a mediation clause to precede that procedure. And then breach by facility. I can assure you that a convention center agreement is going to spell out a multitude of ways that you can be in breach of your agreement. What if they breach? And it has happened. I mentioned in the earlier session that this organization will remain nameless, but we did a show in Vegas for 9 years, and there was a facility that I wouldn't even do an RFP with because they had a reputation that I heard through the Coconut Wireless that a signed contract means nothing to them if they get a better piece of business. So if they breach, what happens? Compliance with laws. Rest assured that the facility is going to insist that you're in compliance with all state, federal, and local laws. Well, that should be reciprocal. They should be in compliance also. Conflict avoidance. If you have a competing show or shows, it's in your best interest to ask for a non-compete clause for a certain number of days before and after your event. Construction or renovation. This is one of those areas that as soon as the facility knows about it, you need to know. Because it could be something that could impact your show to the degree that you may not be able to hold it. And then exclusive services. More and more convention centers are bringing exclusive service providers into their building. Leslie and I experienced that just recently in Tampa. And they're doing that because they're, in some cases, public owned and looking for every single dollar that they can generate. And any exclusive service provider that they have, well, guess what? They're going to get a cut of that. Well, you want to have in your agreement, if needed, it may not apply to your organization, but if you need to sell show-related merchandise, tapes, discs, books, whatever, you want to be sure that that's spelled out. The facility is going to require you as an organization to have insurance. There's no reason that shouldn't be reciprocal. And the same thing for indemnity, because they're going to ask you to indemnify them. Well, I can name a few instances where they should indemnify you, so that should be reciprocal. And an organizer's right to cure defaults. Once again, there's many ways that you can breach, that you can be in breach. You want a time frame in your agreement that gives you a period of time that you can address those breaches. Because it may be something as simple as being late on a deposit. And I know about you, but our organization, with the shows that we have, the individuals responsible for our shows are busy. They're traveling a lot, and they could get a note saying that, hey, you're in default because you haven't made this payment. Well, we need time, and so I tried real hard to get a period of time in there, whether it's 5 or 10 business days, that we're able to cure a default before they can claim that we're in default. Now, you may have an excellent working relationship with the convention center, and that may be a moot point. But that excellent working relationship you have with them today, by the time you get there, or 3 years from now, may not exist. It could be a whole different regime. We're going through a situation now in the largest boat show that we have, and we term it the largest boat show in the world, the Miami Boat Show. The Miami Convention Center is going to undergo a major renovation, and right now they're looking at potentially, you guys, yeah. Yeah. And they, they're being very, at least in our world, they're being very narrow-minded about this and not looking, long-term. And we're frantically trying to work out something with them where, but spell it out. Spell it out. Quiet enjoyment. You and your attendees and exhibitors have every reason to expect that you can enjoy uninterrupted, quiet use of the facility. And then strikes and labor disputes. I highly recommend you write a contingency into your leases for this, that as soon as an organization smells that there's even a chance of something like this happening, that you're made aware of it. And notwithstanding that if it does happen, what remedy do you have? Now, we had a show, this is the show that we actually ended up selling, but we had a show that was very profitable for us. The lease was near 7 figures for this show. That there was a potential, I learned, that there was going to be a strike there during our show. My heart came up through my throat when I heard that. And I ran to that lease as quick as my legs would carry me, dug through it to see if I had, this clause in there. Thank God we did. So it wouldn't have been an issue, and it might not have been an issue. But guess what? I wouldn't have had to explain to our president that we could potentially be on the hook for nearly 7 figures for something that we can't use. Utilities. We've had shows where the facility couldn't provide the level of electricity or water or whatever for our show that we needed. Well, what remedy is there for that? You just need to spell it out.
It's always a good idea for the pre-employee contractor. You have a partner. Kim and I are working right now, support them going to a facility or going somewhere else. It may even be a facility you can't work in, but if you're a long-term partner with someone, we kind of said, we've looked at programs and said, okay, here's questions to ask before going in. So before you sign that contract, it's great to get your partner and say, okay, are there dryers for this section? Or where are the air outlets located? Because I know that I'm going to have a lot of industry that's going to go to this section. So it's always good to go with the partner.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Your service partners are the experts. So I agree with that wholeheartedly. Some considerations when we talk about convention center contracting. Be aware of your costs, and I'm sure all of you are. Is it net based upon net square footage, gross square footage, flat rate, combination of a couple of them? Does it include a percentage of, if you're a consumer show, a percentage of the ticketed sales? The lease is not just about the space, dates, and how much you're going to pay. And I think I alluded to this, that 99% of your lease language may never be used, but if you need that, if it comes into play, you want to be protected. That 99% is very important. Let your in-house counsel or whoever you designate within your organization be responsible for that. This will allow you to prioritize your group's needs, whatever that is. And from whether it's space, rates, dates, or just special events you're planning for them, you don't have to worry about that. Those other items. Your lease might be longer than you think, and it probably is. Because any reference in your lease to other documents, make those other documents part of your lease. And convention centers more and more these days are going to that because it makes you appear as if you're getting a shorter lease. You know, you don't have as much to contend with. But if it's referenced in the lease, it's part of the lease and you want to treat it as such. And those documents, you know, they could be called rules and regulations, policies and guidelines, whatever they are, you want to get a copy of them. And they're normally available through the organization's website. And if not, ask the person you're working with at the facility for a copy of them and review them as if they're a part of the agreement, because they are. There's a lot of work, as I mentioned, in reviewing a facility's contract. And that's why I also recommend doing a template for convention centers, especially if you're going to be there for more than 1 year. But when you stop to think about it, even if you're there for 1 year, you start out with, you know, maybe they're with their boilerplate, but when you end up at a place which is more desirable for you, right? And it's something you may be willing to work with for the next year. But if you're new to a convention center and you start out with a boilerplate that you're comfortable with, I guarantee you that 99% of the time you're going to end up with a document that is much more comfortable and user-friendly to your organization. Money back guaranteed. How's that? Money back guaranteed. It's more work up front, but it's going to save you time in the end. And exclusives in facilities are not negotiable. If they have an exclusive food and beverage provider, yeah, you can't use Centerplate if Aramark is there. But their prices can be negotiable, especially if they understand that you don't have to have your event there. So if you have a group breakfast and they could potentially get it, or a group dinner, it behooves you to leave all that on the table until you're comfortable with where you're going to end up with, from a contract standpoint, for with both the convention center and the hotel. Because let's say you have your breakfast and you've already agreed to hold it at the hotel. Well, don't think the convention center doesn't know that. They talk to they'll talk to each other, you know. Now, sometimes there are food and beverage minimums in convention centers, but this is typically where you use concession stands, and you ask them to maybe open up more concession stands than what they want to based upon your group history. They'll say, fine, you know, we'll do that, but we want you to guarantee that there's going to be maybe $2,000 in revenue each day, and any shortfall you're going to pay for. We have a situation now in Tampa where we're looking at doing a food court in the ballroom because we're uncomfortable with a number of concession stands that are there. Before it's signed, sealed, and delivered, I bet that they're going to ask for minimums from those stands. I'd be willing to bet. Top 10 for convention center tips. But before we do that, any questions on convention centers? Well, we'll move right along then. When you get a convention center lease, there's one assumption you can make, that convention center lease was developed with one purpose in mind: to protect the facility. It's not uncommon for a convention center to have in-house counsel and maybe a law office of 6 attorneys that's going to work on their agreement. And guess what? They need to justify their positions. I'm not down on convention centers by any stretch of the imagination, but they're going to update that on a regular basis. And they have one challenge, and that is to protect the facility. So when you get that, you have to keep that in mind. And that's where, you know, having your template can come in handy, and you have items in there that you're comfortable with. Because you, like them, want to protect your organization, right? Beware of a facility's sole discretion lease insertions. This makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up when I see this in a convention center lease. Why? Because really it gives them the license to spend your money when you stop to think about it. An example is the facility at their sole discretion can determine police staffing levels. Well, what does that mean? They can have a police force of 24 people, 24 hours a day for your move-in, show, and move-out. That's your money that they're spending. So wherever you see that in any lease, ask for that to be a mutual decision, which it should be because it's your money that's being spent. Understand the facility's management structure. Is it public or is it private? Because if it's privately owned, they're going to have a little more leadway in their the dates that they can offer you, the space, the rates, versus public. Because in public, remember very early in the presentation we had those definitions. We had booking policy. Convention centers that are publicly owned, they very rarely will deviate from their price sheets that they've developed in that regard. And guess what Tampa is? Public. City. We had a request for. Did you see that email, Leslie? A request for one of our exhibitors for sponsorship wanted to do this huge blow up on top of the building. So I sent it to the building. I said, hey, can we do this? And he got an email back saying, "Oh, I'll have to send it to the city attorney." And we'll see what they say, you know. Be aware of hidden fees, and the best example I can give you that we discussed already, and that is any document that's referenced in the lease is part of your document. So there can be cost items referenced in those documents that you need to be familiar with. And that sole discretion clause, if you see that anywhere, that's another hidden fee. Obtain a copy of any document referenced in a lease. Know what your business is worth. Now, the example you mentioned about Dallas, we have, because of the effort that we went through to document our room block in Louisville, that program that we developed, the Convention and Visitors Bureau is such an advocate of ours. They would have gone to the convention center and battled for us on that. They would have. Now, all bureaus aren't like that. We're very fortunate in that regard, but if possible, be flexible with your dates. That can help. Sometimes it can help not only in availability, but it can help in rates if it's a private institution. Analyze your time frames for booking and start the lease process early. What do I mean by that? Some of these convention center leases, I've seen them from 4 to 30 pages, sometimes even longer. That's a lot of verbiage that one has to go through. And very rarely do you accept it as is, or should you accept it as is. And when you send your changes to them, their attorney or attorneys have to go through all that stuff, which is time consuming. It comes back to you. Very rarely is it exactly where you want it. So you make more changes and you have to send it back to them. The last place you want to be caught in is where this is consuming so much time that you need to get information out to your attendees and to your exhibitors that you're starting to accept things that you wouldn't normally accept, that you feel like that they have you captive, and you have to because of the time constraint that you're under. So start it early to avoid that, as early as you can. No? All right. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much.